everybody, it's Alyce-Kay Ruckelshaus, Threshold of Hineni, and I'm here for a craft table chat, which is where I'm just talking with you as friends, sitting across the table from me while I'm crafting or doing something that has to do with crafts at my craft table, and we're just talking casually. I am not teaching, I'm just sharing what's on my heart, and if there's anything that challenges you spiritually, you better check it out with scripture. Okay, because I'm just like I said, just kind of talking off the cuff. And tonight I'm not probably going to talk about anything really spiritual. I thought that I would just share some fun things from my childhood. While I look through this journal, it was recently purchased, and so I need to get it ready for shipping. And so I just want to go through it and check and make sure that everything's okay, and that doesn't take a lot of concentration. And to be honest, I kind of want to say goodbye to it because I really love this journal. I don't want to give it up. I had just about taken it out of my shop to use myself, but that's okay. I'm making myself another one, a small one anyway. So I guess I am going to talk about some spiritual stuff. I thought that I would kind of share my testimony of how I quote unquote came to the Lord and some of my thoughts about that, but also like some totally non-spiritual memories, just because it's almost Mother's Day, so I'm like thinking about my family of origin and stuff. And anyway, so my parents were both Christians, and my mom's father died when she was about 4 months old of tuberculosis, and he was in the hospital when she was born. And not terribly long after that, they lived in Livermore, California, and they went to the church where a man named James Black was pastor. And his father, W. Edgar Black, had put together a card that had 100 verses on it that he thought every Christian should memorize. And so James, the pastor, challenged at least the kids. I don't know if he also challenged the adults, but at least the kids in the church to memorize those 100 verses. And if they did, they won a trip to the Christian camp, and I think it was for a week. And my Aunt Lois did that, and so she won that. And she had the choice of going by herself and staying in the dorm, or she could bring her whole family with her and camp, like tent camping, I think, is my understanding, which is hard for me to imagine my grandma doing, but apparently that's what they did. And grandma had 5 kids. My mom was a baby at that time, probably close to a year, maybe a little bit younger than a year at that time. And so they went to this camp, and the evangelist at this camp was the man who wrote the little booklet with the verses in it, and Edgar Black. And he and my grandma met and fell in love, and I think 6 months later, I'm not sure, but anyway, it was kind of a whirlwind romance, and my grandma said it was a little scandalous. They got married, and he moved the family down to Visalia, where he had a ranch, a small ranch with walnuts and yams, sweet potatoes, cotton, and a handful of cows and goats, and lots of cats. And anyway, so I grew up going to that farm, which is sometimes called farm and sometimes called a ranch, and I haven't figured out which it is or if there's a difference or what. But anyway, so Grandpa, being an evangelist, would on Sundays go around town looking for children who were playing outside on Sunday, and he would invite them to come to church. And one of the kids that he saw when my mom was 4 years old was my dad. And so he asked my dad's parents, my grandparents, if he could take my dad and his brother to church, and they said yes, probably because they appreciated the babysitting. And So my dad became a Christian, and he and my mom eventually got married, and they moved to San Francisco. My dad went up there to go to college, and my mom followed him and worked as a secretary. And then when I was born, I think she kept working as a secretary for a while. I think that my a good friend of theirs, who I call an aunt, but she's a good friend, took care of me. And then after, when I was like about one, we moved to Visalia, moved back to where my parents were from, and we were going to Parkside Chapel, which was a evangelical Christian Missionary and Alliance church. And anyway, at some point, my parents decided to go to the Mennonite Brethren Church, and so that's how I wound up being in that. When I was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old, I think, we started going to the Mennonite Brethren Church. I remember that I had a white, fluffy coat that I would wear with black buttons on it that I just really loved. And anyway, then when I was about 5, or maybe just before I turned 5, I'm not sure. No, I think I was already 5. We moved up to the Silicon Valley, which wasn't called Silicon Valley yet, but to Santa Clara. My dad got a job at Lockheed as an internal auditor, and so we started going to the Mennonite Brethren Church in Santa Clara. And so I've talked about growing up in that church and everything, and there's some negative things, but it was a good place to grow up in, and the people really did sincerely love the Lord. And there was a very strong missions emphasis. In fact, my dad, when Dick Hillis came and spoke there, my dad felt led to quit his job at Lockheed and work as Director of Administrative Services for a missionary organization. And so I kind of grew up in that organization. And my dad figured out at one point that almost everybody in our church had been on some kind of short or long-term missions at some point in their life. And that's pretty cool because, I just thought that was normal. I didn't realize. But it's like, as an adult, I've gone to a lot of churches that don't even talk about foreign missions, and people don't even know about it even. And we're talking about the Great Commission here. Jesus was very clear that this was a really, really important thing. So how did I become a Christian? It's like my parents said the sky is blue, and I believed them, and they said Jesus loves you, God loves you, Jesus died for you, and I believed them. And so there were times when I accepted Christ, and I say times because I did that like every night. I prayed for Jesus to come into my heart every single night. And for years, whenever there was an invitation at church or at a Billy Graham crusade, I would go forward because I never felt like I was saved, because I never had a real conversion experience, and the testimonies that I heard were of people who had been on drugs, or they were murderers, or whatever. We listened to Unshackled, which was this radio show. It was really good. I'm not in any way putting it down, but it was always these really dramatic testimonies, and I didn't have a testimony like that, and so I didn't feel like I was really a Christian. But many, many years later, so it's like, okay, if you want to insist that you have to ask Jesus into your heart, I did that many times, so I'm covered. But many years later, I came to the conclusion, reading through the Bible, there's not really a specific command that you have to. First of all, there's nothing said about asking Jesus into your heart. There's no sinner's prayer. Not that those things are wrong, but I'm just saying it's not in the Bible, so obviously it's not the only way that you can become a Christian. And Paul talked to Timothy about how his mother and grandmother raised him. I'm looking at this for ideas because I can't really think of ideas while I'm talking to you. So I'm going to look through here for like other things that I've done in journals to kind of use in here. Um, but Paul was talking about how Timothy's mother and grandmother raised him in the faith. And, it doesn't say, and you came to the Lord at such and such an age or anything like that. It's just, it's kind of like, well, he just always was. Because he was just, and I'm not saying that because you were raised in a Christian home, that makes you a Christian. I'm not saying that at all. There is that belief element, but I always believed it. And from as young as I can remember, I wanted to be close to God. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to obey him. I wanted to serve him. I really, really loved God. And I knew that he loved me until I was a teenager, basically, or junior high, I think, is when I started doubting that God loved me. I was molested when I was 6, and I think that had a lot to do with it, although I didn't really think of that at the time as being the reason that I was having all these doubts. So, what was I saying? So anyway, yeah, so it's like, like I said, if you feel that somebody has to ask Jesus into their heart to be saved, okay, I'm covered. But I really don't believe that is what saves you. It's trusting Jesus. It's believing that he died for you and that he rose from the dead. Paul says, if you, my Bible's not right here, sorry. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe that he rose from the dead, something along that line, that you shall be saved. And I believe that, I confess that Jesus is my Lord. It's not just something to say, it's something to really be part of your life. And I've always wanted to follow him. And that's just grown stronger and stronger and stronger throughout my life. Were there times when I backslid? Absolutely. Absolutely. Were there times when I struggled? Yes, of course. But there was always this underlying desire to please God and this a relationship with him. When I remember one time when we were living in Los Banos, so I was probably in my late 30s or early 40s. I remember driving down Pacheco Boulevard, and I had been really doubting God's love for me. It just seemed like there were a lot of things that I was going through that were really horrible situations, and God wasn't getting me out of them. And so I thought that he didn't love me. And I mean, it was just really, really hard. And so I thought, God must hate me. And, in Romans 9, it talks about how God hated Esau before he was even born. And I thought, I'm Esau. God hates me. And I remember talking to God about it. It was kind of funny, You believe God hates you, but you're talking to him. I remember talking to God about it and just saying, I don't know what to do with this, Lord, because if you hate me, I don't know what to do, because the only thing I want to do is serve you. And I don't know what to do if you won't let me serve you. And I talked to my pastor about it later, and he pointed out to me that if I wanted to serve God, that probably God didn't hate me. Not because of my desire to serve him, but my desire to serve him came from the fact that God loved me and had called me. And anyway, but then there was another time after I got divorced, because growing up, at least among evangelicals, and I really don't know what was going on in the rest of the church at the time, but among evangelicals, divorce was kind of like the unforgivable sin. I mean, nobody would have said that. Everybody would have said, oh no, there's, that's not the unforgivable sin, but they treated it like it was. And my parents, they and some friends of theirs had started a marriage ministry called Christian Marriage Fulfillment. And so I grew up in a really good, it was not bad at all in this regard, a really good, strong, marriage focused family and culture where, marriage was sacred and it wasn't something to take lightly, and you didn't just go around getting divorced. So when I got divorced, and I'm not going to talk about why, because like I said, I don't believe in hanging out other people's dirty laundry, so I'm not going to talk about what was my problem or what was his problem or anything like that. We're just not even going to go there. But I got divorced, and of course that was kind of like the unforgivable sin, not just with people from my church, but at the time we had just moved here to Tennessee from California, and I had been doing a lot of speaking at Christian things in California, and and I've written books and stuff, and so when people there found out that I had gotten divorced, they wrote emails to me and sent letters to me about how terrible I was and how they burned my books and my tapes. And I mean, looking back now, I can laugh about it because it's like, that's really stupid. But, because it's like, okay, either the teaching was good or it wasn't. It's not, people are, human vessels are not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But anyway, that's just how people dealt with things that they disagreed with. And I think in some cases, because some of those people ended up getting divorced themselves, I think that they were trying to deflect. But anyway, there was just so much condemnation. And I, like I said in an earlier chat, I tended to just automatically believe not just those in authority, but pretty much anybody. I doubted my own ability to know right from wrong, or to be able to figure anything out. I mean, it's like, here I had a degree in being taught how to study the Bible. But any person, any Christian, any brand new Christian who knew nothing whatsoever about the Bible could convince me that I was wrong, because I had no confidence at all in God leading me or anything. And so when I got all this condemnation from people, I believed that that was God saying that I was horrible and terrible and so on. And looking back, I mean, it's actually kind of funny, because I was like, God kept being merciful to me, and he kept being loving to me, but I did everything that I could to try to get him to leave me alone, not because I wanted him to leave me alone, but because I felt like that was best for him. Like, I know what's best for God. And so, I just didn't feel like it was good for God to be associated with me, and I'm looking for something else to put in here. And so, what am I saying? So, after my divorce, I did really do some things that were crazy, because I was trying to convince God that he should not love me. And so, yeah. So there were some things that I'm not proud of that were really bad. But at the same time, it was like, even though I was trying to scare God away, I still really loved him, and I still really wanted to serve him. It's just that I didn't think that it was good for him. And, which I know is like the most absurd thing ever. None of us is good for him, really. But Anyway, I was at, a friend and I were taking a class that a local pastor's wife was teaching about getting healing from your past wounds. And, oh shoot, I cut this wrong. Okay, I've got to think about this for a second, you guys. I messed it up. Okay. At one point in the class, she asked us to close our eyes and imagine what God looked like. Okay, so first of all, I struggled with the whole theological thing of thou shalt not have any graven images and all that stuff. Okay, so I have to, go through that kind of stuff. That's just me. And then when I finally got to where I could stop and try to imagine him, I saw him with his back to me. And it wasn't like, like God only showed his back to Elijah and Moses because he was too holy and glorious for them to look at. It wasn't like that. It was he had his back to me because he was rejecting me. And I knew that was wrong. I think at that point in the class, I had come to recognize that God did love me. So I knew that was wrong, but I didn't quite know why it was wrong. Because I did feel that God had turned his back on me and rejected me, because that's what people were telling me. And so it took me, 2 or 3 weeks before I realized, and this was huge for me, and it probably sounds really stupid to you guys, because, I think most people know this, but I didn't. It took me a while to realize that just because people rejected me didn't mean that God rejected me. And even though they were Christians, and even though some of them were pastors and other people in authority, they didn't necessarily represent God's views. And that was a huge thing for me. I mean, it was really, really huge. And when I say that, I mean myself too. None of us is a perfect representation or representative of God. We're supposed to represent him, yes, but we're very inaccurate representatives so much of the time. And even when we're trying to accurately represent God, we don't do a very good job. And, we're supposed to be ambassadors for Christ and everything, but, we mess up. We really do. We really mess up badly. And a lot of times we end up turning people away from Christ rather than bringing them to him. And there's just so many things, you guys, that I look back and I go, it's a miracle. It really is a miracle that I am still a Christian. That I still believe in God and want to serve him, because people weren't very good representatives of God to me. But I think that what was going on in my life, I wasn't trying to challenge people, but the things that were going on in my life challenged people. They didn't know what to do with it, and it's kind of like, Jesus' disciples asking him, is this man blind or lame? I can't remember which one, because of something he did or because of something that his parents did. And Jesus said it wasn't for either reason. It was so that God could be glorified. And it's like, I think that people just automatically assume that if something's going wrong in your life, that it must be because you're a really horrible person. And that's not always the case. And I'm not saying that I wasn't a horrible person. I don't think I was. I mean, I really was trying to follow God. But I know that I wasn't perfect, of course. None of us is. Um, but I don't think that I was like so much worse than everybody else, is what I'm saying. Which doesn't make me righteous or anything, but I'm just saying I don't think that God was out to punish me more than he was out to punish people who had good marriages. So that was like a big thing for me, was recognizing that just because someone's a Christian doesn't mean that they know everything that's going on in my life and are an authority on how God feels about it or how God feels about me. And it also was a real eye-opener to me that if other people aren't representing God very well, I'm not either, most likely. And that I needed to really work more on being a better representative of him. And, again, I'm not saying that I do that perfectly. I really, really try, though. I mean, because it made me so aware of how, especially how our condemnation affects other people. And how, I mean, like I said, you guys, I really believe it's a miracle that I'm still a Christian, that I still believe. And the things that we do and say can be that powerful that they can make someone turn away from God. And I say that, I want to say that really forcefully and emphatically, because I want you to really think about the things that you say and do towards people, because those things really do make a difference. And I don't think that we always realize that. There was a memory I wanted to tell you about that is not at all spiritual from my childhood. I was just thinking about this today because in a group that I'm in, we were asked, when did you start crafting? And I was like, wow, I've always loved to make things and stuff. Well, I remember when I was, I'm guessing like about 3 or so. My mom might be able to tell me. I loved to take baths, and I would spend forever in the bathtub. And I had a TV show in my imagination, obviously, where I was the host, and I taught people how to make things, how to make animals and stuff from the soap bubbles, the soap suds. And I'm pretty sure that I taught all this out loud and everything. Anyway, I would stay in the bathroom for so long that my mom finally started setting a timer in there, but I figured out how to change the timer, turn it back before it rang, so my mom started putting it outside the door. So it was like, I don't know, I loved crafts, and I loved teaching crafts back then even. So that's, I don't know, that's kind of a funny story. Anyway, back to, I guess, my life spiritually. I mentioned in a previous video about going with teen missions. That was a really important thing. A little bit before that, I had gone to a youth camp with our church youth group, where the speaker, and I don't remember who it was, but the speaker had asked us to make a commitment to go anywhere God asked us to go and do anything he asked us to do. And to me, that was a no-brainer, so I stood up. It was one of those things where you bow your head and close your eyes, and, the preacher gives an invitation, and, you stand up. He didn't have us come forward, but he had us stand up if we wanted to commit to that. And to me, it was like, of course. Of course I want to commit to that. Why would I not? And I was surprised that there were very few of us who stood up, because to me it was just like, yeah. And I'm not saying that to say that I'm better or anything like that. I'm just saying that's just what I thought would be the norm. And it's not. And anyway, so going on this teen missions trip was kind of as a result of that. It was kind of, one of my friends had been reading Campus Life magazine, and she saw teen missions and she wanted to go, and so I was praying about going. She didn't end up going, but I did. And I loved it. I mean, that was a really pivotal time in my life because I really learned there about having a personal relationship with God. That was something that I think really was taught in my church, but that we could have a personal relationship with God, but I never really felt like I was taught how to do that. And it's a hard thing to teach because it's kind of different for each person. If you really try to make it like, oh, this is what you have to do and everything, it stops being a personal relationship with God. It's kind of like telling people how they have to run their marriage and stuff. And so it's a hard thing to teach. And so I didn't really understand that until I went with Team Missions, and that was something that they really taught. And that's, that might have been part of the reason why my parents and my pastor and everybody were so enthusiastic about me going on it, because, they knew that I would get that teaching. And I think because I was questioning a lot and probably asking questions that people couldn't answer and stuff. And we had like a really long, involved, but very, very interesting devotional time each day. Every day on the team after we left boot camp, everybody would be, would go off by themselves for at least half an hour, but we could go for longer if we wanted, to have just a personal time with the Lord. And at first I was like, what do I do? Half an hour was forever. It was really hard. And after a while it got to where if we actually had to go someplace after half an hour, I felt like, wow, I got cheated of some of my time with the Lord. It was just really cool. And